Have you ever wondered what the real lives of the beauties of ancient Rome were like, when history often only remembers the squares and arenas and forgets the dark corners of the dungeons? In the article Between Marble and Darkness, A Day in the Life of a Roman Prostitute, we will lift the broken curtain, explore every breath, every step, and every graffiti of memories from Marcia, one of the countless Roman prostitutes who scraped together every drop of sweat to feed the mighty empire, mixed with satirical humor and poetic poetry, helping you better understand ancient Roman life, the cultural features of Roman prostitution, and the timeless lessons of human dignity. Don't miss this journey full of contradictions where body and soul are traded for every moment of freedom. She had not awakened to the chirping of birds or the fresh breath of morning dew, but from a short sleep, interrupted by half-dreams of the past and worries about the future, and a few rags wrapped in crude lipstick, the only makeup she could carry after a hard night's work. She used a soft cloth, a dirty rag she had hastily washed yesterday too. Lucilia used to call it a library of solitude. The books were just grease stains on the walls, and scribbles from customers who had commented excellent area or satisfactory, good value for money. Now the graffiti had faded, like the layers of age that had covered her body and soul. She powdered her cheeks to make them a little more rosy, then applied bright red lipstick, as if to remind her guests, I am still alive, and I still love life. Then she bent down to pick up the small basket, which contained a piece of dry bread, some dried beans, and a jug of oil for a quick breakfast. Leno, a large man with suspicious eyes, was ready to check the health and spirit of the girls in the cellar. Marcia took a deep breath, forced a smile on her lips, and gently touched the door. A soft click, and the show began. Every day she took the opportunity to munch on the bread, before she crossed the threshold, which was when her work began. Marcia's voice was like a whisper to the great Rome, both polite and filled with pride in overcoming fate. Marcia was still the writer of her own story, at least for the moment each guest entered, and she made them believe in the temporary miracle of seduction. The charcoal eyeliner emphasized her tired eyelids, hiding the dark circles that had lingered over countless sleepless nights. Each stroke was a mask that hid the truth, but also a small ray of hope for her remaining self. The sound of the broom swept the floor, in time with the beating of her heart. She rubbed it on her hands, the strong scent diffusing the damp smell like a talisman. Then she carefully applied some oil to her hair. A few strands of it were still there, since her wig had been ripped off long ago. Her hands trembled slightly as she tried to pull back each strand, as if every movement had to be measured to avoid revealing the scars and bruises that life had bestowed upon her. Not a single visitor had passed through the room, but work was already waiting behind the heavy door. A new day had begun, and she had to transform into Marcia, a fake name, but a majestic one. Marcia, a girl in a short amber toga and a copper necklace, strode confidently across the cold cement. In her mind, Marcia was a professional actress. She knew how to smile, how to nod gracefully, how to avoid overly intimate curious glances. Lucilia looked at herself in the mirror. The corners of her eyes still had dust, and the lines of fatigue were imprinted under her eyes. She shook her head slightly, as if to shake off the broken pieces of a beautiful dream, then bent down to pick up the almost empty olive oil bottle to apply on her face. The flickering light of the oil lamp reflected on the rusty mirror, creating shimmering spots of light at first glance. Anyone would think it was the promise of a new day. The dark cellar room still smelled of dampness, the strong scent of fish oil and the remnants of yesterday's wine. Imagine waking up not in a palace but in a dark, dungeon-like room just 2 feet wide, where makeup is not just a beauty treatment but a miracle that preserves dignity in a harsh society. This article not only reports the life of Roman prostitutes with dry data, but also portrays a vivid emotional portrait. Part 1. Awakening in the dark. Lucilia's whispers. The morning light had not yet reached the corners of the old town, but Lucilia was already awake. The room was only about 2 steps wide, enough for her to turn around and hold her face to hold back her tears. The rough rocks surrounded her, like a wall of time blocking her every breath. A rotten straw bed, spread on the cold cement floor, was both her sleeping place and her desk every night. Lucilia gently lifted the straw blanket, and the rustling sound rang out like sad bells. On the corner of the small table, there was a battered bronze mirror. Here, every dawn is a bitter gift, Lucille whispered to herself. There were no windows, no natural light, no breeze. After cleaning, she went to the small bottle of scented wine. Standing up, Lucilia leaned against the wall, took a deep breath, and closed her eyes. Marcia's breath no longer smelled of musty wine. When Marcia finished, she glanced back at the bronze mirror, crack across its surface like a knife cut into a person's life. On the other side of the iron door, the footsteps of the brothel owner were heard. Good morning, city of white pillars and silent judgment. I come to serve, to survive, to live on. And then, in the dim light of the oil lamp, she stepped out of the dungeon, carrying with her a small belief, no matter how life forced her into a windowless cage. Part 2. Makeup redrawing Marcia's soul. After leaving the dungeon, Marcia entered the damp corridor of the brothel, where the dim light of the oil lamp seemed to be trying to touch every breath. Amidst the rough stone walls marked by time and faint graffiti, she found a makeshift dressing table, precariously perched on 2 stone slabs. On the table were only a few simple tools: a broken white powder, a stained earthenware jar, and a black charcoal jar that smelled of ash. Marcia sat down, holding her hands up to stop the tears from drying. She looked at her reflection in the warped bronze mirror, where the image that appeared was both familiar and foreign, and fingers that are searching for a way out. Was this the face of a woman who had dreamed of happiness, or was it just a makeshift mask for abusers? The wig was faded and slightly thinning, but each strand still held a dreamy scent of perfume. She combed her hair, the rusty comb scratching her scalp, and each throbbing pain spread down her neck. The scar was not as painful as the longing for carefree days when her hair used to sparkle in the morning sun. It was like a doorway into Marcia's soul, a place of hidden sadness and broken memories. Her footsteps echoed steadily on the stone floor, measuring each vital beat. She told herself, "Today, I will continue the performance, the magic trick of hiding memories, so that when the curtain falls, only the powder and lipstick will remain." She looked at her reflection on the stone floor, where the powder and eyeliner intertwined into a magical curtain. That was the moment when she, Lucilia, hidden behind the name Marcia, shrank herself in the midst of the bustling life. She looked like a goddess about to ascend to the throne with pale eyes, full lips, and marble-white skin. The only echo was the sound of footsteps from down the hall, the approaching guests, hungry eyes and heartless bargains. The dazzling garment was more than a professional badge. It was a shield for the soul, calling attention to appearances rather than the past. But the mirror couldn't lie. Her eyes were still sad, and behind the meticulous makeup was a deep thought. When the charcoal touched her skin, she could feel each vibration, like each heartbeat pounding through her eyelashes. Marcia pressed the talisman into her palm, closed her eyes and prayed softly. Please give her the strength to smile when faced with indifferent eyes, and give her wise words when people use money to buy loneliness. She didn't spend much time on that state of mind. Each remaining tear was a crack that could reveal a fragile heart. The lipstick color was not meant to attract attention. It was a temporary declaration. I still know how to love, how to live, and how to retain the last bit of power. Each stroke of lipstick was like a powerful mark, transforming Marcia from a humble girl into the main character on the stage of life. This powder is not just for beauty, she whispered, but also to hide the marks of time, broken trust. Marcia dabbed a thin layer of white powder on her face, blending it as if to caress an unhealed wound. The powder did not make her pale, but created a fragile veil, enough to show the traces of fatigue without revealing the deep pain. She looked at her eyes in the mirror, deciding to use charcoal eyeliner to create a thick line, part cut, part reminder of the blade. The long eyeliner curled up slightly at the end, giving off a sense of sadness mixed with pride. Next, she used her finger to dab red lipstick on her lips, gently spreading it from the center to the sides. She sighed, put down the mirror, and ran her hand through her blonde wig, the only treasure left from the days when she was called Lucilia, the girl with long, shiny black hair. Finished with her makeup, Marcia stood and looked at herself in the large mirror that hung on the stone wall. She asked quickly, but found no answer. Marcia took a deep breath, forced a smile, and smoothed her short toga in the dark, a living billboard. As she stepped out of the dressing room, the hallway light cut through the scented smoke, creating a soft light that enveloped Marcia like a silk scarf. Before reaching the large door leading to the lobby, she quietly took out from her pocket a small box containing a talisman, a red piece of cloth embroidered with the image of Venus, the goddess of love and desire. Then Marcia's footsteps stopped for a second at the threshold. "Just wait," she whispered. "Every time I put on makeup, it is one more time I draw a path for the soul to find its way back." And then the door opened, welcoming Marcia into a world of artificial light and whispering sounds where she would become a star, if only for a moment. Part 3. The Lady's Not Toga. The fade advertising billboard as Marcia left the dungeon corridor with a determined step. She knew she had to transform from the disadvantaged Lucilia into a symbol of the profession, with a famous short toga. The toga, a garment that seemed to belong only to the nobility and royalty, was the uniform of women excluded from the circle of honor. For them, the toga was not a statement of power or grace, but the most Marcia's toga needed no brooch or gold embroidery. The sheer brilliance of the fabric and the daring shortness of it were enough to scream, "I am invited, I am ready." In front of the large mirror in the waiting room, Marcia slowly put on a short toga of brilliant amber. The words rang out not only to advertise her wares, but also to affirm her presence. The melody of the call didn't need to be elaborate, because the repetition was enough to engrave it in the mind, and she would lose her grace. Too slow and she would be forgotten. Each step carried a decision. Cold weather made her shiver. Heat made her exhausted, but the air of money always hung in the air. Customers could appear unexpectedly, like the wind, or linger like ghosts, but either way, Marcia had to be ready. In the darkness of the attic, the short toga became a curtain that obscured all social ties. where the cries gave way to instinct and transaction. But even as the door closed, Marcia's hand clutched the hem of her robe, as if holding on to her last shred of power. But for Marcia, it was a double-edged sword. It exposed contempt, but also brought temporary power. The power of appearance, the power of being seen, and especially the power of forcing others to pay to see her. The short toga would soon be exposed to the street again, but before that, she needed to put on a clean face, to regain some strength and take a good look at herself. Sometimes, she wondered, was it the sound of a voice that made the brand, and her face just a prop? Marcia returned to her old position, put on her toga, repainted her lipstick, and replaced the amulet in her palm. Each time the market passed, she needed to reaffirm herself. I have not disappeared. I still exist and I still have value. She had to know how to moderate it, not to show too much, or she would lose the necessary elegance. And as the shade from the tall stone house fell, her toga became less colorful, more subdued, like her face without makeup. The profession had forced her to shed her Lucelia identity and assume herself, but it had also taught her that power lay in the ability to turn every fold of fabric, every line of eyeliner, every coal into a marketplace of hope, however patched, however makeshift. Passers-by paused for a moment, looking at her from head to toe with both curiosity and disdain. Just like Marcia, always waiting for the moment to be reborn with a new look, leaving behind a long day with many traces imprinted on the skin and soul. Some pretended not to hear, but their eyes lingered on her waist, her wig, and her teeth that were slightly exposed when Marcia smiled. The thin fabric was askew, revealing her bare shoulders and rosy cheeks, which had been painted with makeup. Each fold of the fabric had a single purpose: to attract the eye. It was a law, a way for society to emphasize difference. And filling her nostrils with the smell of kitchen smoke, old wine, and dried fermented fish, Marcia took a deep breath, forcing her smile to brighten, and continued her invitation. Who would trade the dull dawn for a romantic moment? She raised her hand to the front of her toga, where the hem of her toga fell gracefully into her cleavage. Even the sexiness had to be measured. When Marcia wore the toga, she carried with her both public contempt and power, to attract attention, to control the gaze, and to decide the fate of her customers. He stopped, looking at Marcia for a long moment, as if trying to absorb every fold of the fabric, every stroke of the paint on his cheek. She bowed, her voice soft and urgent. "How many minutes would you like, sir?" The soldier nodded, pulling 2 coins from his pocket. Marcia reached out to take them, the cold coins touching her skin, awakening a feeling that was both a plea and a necessity. She turned, letting the flickering candlelight fall on her white neck, then stopped, casually lifting the hem of her dress, exposing her slender thighs. In Rome, no one dared to wear a short toga except a half-dresser, she told herself, her eyes flashing with pride. Unlike the stola, a modest long dress reserved for respectable women, the toga of prostitutes had clear rules. Stola was forbidden, toga was mandatory. She stepped out into the small courtyard in front of the brothel, where the uneven stone floor was marked by the footprints of countless people who had passed through. Candles hanging in the windows cast a warm glow. Several other girls were also dressing themselves in togas, some too tightly tied, others with their lapels undone. The atmosphere was crowded, mixed with giggles, whispered. There was a space that was both intimate and fiercely competitive, where each female character was a star in a drama of honor. Marcia stopped by the stone pillar and softly said, "New day, new prices. 2 for the first minute, 3 for the second. 5 if you want to talk," she intoned like street music. The sound of the short toga tapping against her feet reminded her that every step had to be considered. Too hasty. The wind blew hard across the street corner, blowing the strands of her blonde wig. The first customer appeared, an old soldier, his coat faded, his gait slightly limping. "I'm selling time, not affection," she thought as she led him into the room. As morning turned to noon, the street corner continued to bustle. The short toga, in the bright Roman sunlight, shimmered even more brilliantly. As the sun rose above the horizon and the guests sought shelter, Marcia pulled her toga a little more tightly, like a bitch moving to escape the heat. At the end of a morning of selling herself, Marcia gathered her toga, rolled it up neatly, and stepped into the dungeon corridor to prepare for the afternoon. "My profession, my toga, is an indelible billboard," she whispered. "And when night falls, the toga waits to be washed, to be reborn for tomorrow." Part 4. Sexual solicitation in a fake city of terror as the Roman midday sun beats down on the white stones. The street corner in front of the brothel becomes Marcia's living stage. There are no flyers, no neon signs. The only marketing she has is her voice, her eyes, and graffiti. Because in the bustling but morally oppressive city of Rome, marketing is not written in books, but printed on the walls, uttered in invitations, and painted on her body, a sign, more vivid than any advertisement. She smiled proudly, her eyes twinkling with mischief, and then she said, "One call from the stone corridor." She tilts her shoulders, twists her hips, and lets each fold of her toga sway an invitation. Because for customers, First impressions determine every payment. Every morning, Marcia chose her voice like an instrument. Not too soft, lest it be heard. Not too loud, lest the lawyer scold her. Who would trade a trivial moment for an eternal moment? The tone of the question is suggestive of a universe of emotions. Passers-by stop and stare. And Marcia has hit the promotional campaign. She raises her hand slightly, points to the neckline of her thin chiffon dress, revealing her sensuality, then lifts the hem of her dress, suggesting an untold story. As her cries almost blend into the noise of the market, Marcia turns every step into a marketing dance. 2. Graffiti. Roman Yelp on the gray brick wall near the main entrance. The scrawled letters are Marcia's most natural way of building. Satisfied customers had painted their names or their complaints on pebbles with exclamation points or scribbled smiles. In the morning, she would stay near the gate of the brothel. At noon, she would move to the corner of the market, near the Temple of Venus. And in the afternoon, she would wander around the public bathhouse. Caius short but sweet. Felix menus perfect. Julius cheap price. Good quality. Curious visitors came to see the review. And so marketing spread in a silent cycle of curiosity. Marcia cleverly paid a newsboy to add the following line. Marcia, charming as the night snow, reasonable price. The wall instantly became a visual magazine. Spreading word of mouth. 3. Location strategy. Busy as a guarantee. That flexibility always puts her at the top of the ranking of favorite prostitutes. Because customers believe that busy is a guarantee of quality. Marcia didn't always stand still. She knew a simple rule. Put yourself where there was a lot of foot traffic. Brothel pros, fixed, easy to find. Graffiti wall. When customers hesitate, Marcia uses the empathy trick. Disadvantages. Cost of renting a place. Competing with many other girls. Public places. Sometimes, Marcia cleverly offers a glass of diluted wine. A small upsell to prolong the deal and make the moment seem more luxurious than the money spent. Pros. Free. Access to new audience. Disadvantages. Risk of being scolded by authorities. Having to constantly move around. Improvise advantages. Proactive in time. Separate from management. Disadvantages. Unsafe. Prone to collision. Difficult to build a long-term brand. Thanks to her observation skills, she never misses a customer's wishes, making them feel taken care of. Even if it is just a temporary transaction, Marcia usually follows a schedule. Mornings at the brothel, afternoons at the market square, evenings in front of the public bathhouse, where the crowded walls become a special billboard for graffiti. 4. Along with the words, please introduce Marcia, who will make you forget Rome for one night. For although Rome was vast, people still sought out the star that their friends had recommended, a star that never went out on the night map. Customers often kept it as a souvenir and passed it on to friends. Communication tips. The art of negotiation marketing isn't just about showing up. You seem tired. Give me some time to bring you joy and let you forget the storms of everyday life. Her voice was as soft as toothpaste, enough to melt the ice in the customer's heart. Then she set the fee. $2 for 15 minutes, $3 for 20 minutes, and $5 if you want to watch the moon with me. But that temporary reputation is all she has. It allows her to sell moments of happiness in a city that pretends to be terrified but still craves desire. Moon gazing, a humanistic metaphor that hides the transaction, making the customer imagine romance. My marketing is the art of making the temporary immortal, she told herself. 5. Market signals. Reading the eyes. Marcia doesn't promote marketing with flashy advertising, but by reading the market. Eager, hurried eyes. Customers just want quick transactions, she introduces. Fast market, 10-minute service at a preferential price. Affectionate, curious eyes. The guest wants a long story, she suggests a chat combo with a glass of wine, lasting 30 minutes. Resourceful, calculating eyes. Rational customers. She cleverly offers saving options. Service with insurance. The customer comes back a second time. Every eye is a play, and Marcia is both an actor and a director. 6. Word of mouth plan. Marcia understood crowd effect marketing. When a customer was satisfied, she gave him a small piece of paper with her name on it. This method was inexpensive but effective. Every group of soldiers, every caravan of merchants passing through the city carried Marcia's recommendation. 7. Ultimate value. Temporary reputation. Marcia's marketing doesn't promise forever. Each deal is a small market, and then it's over when the door closes. As the night finally fell, Marcia returned to her basement, took off her advertising robes and wiped the graffiti off her hands with a towel. And when the last candle burned out, Marcia's sleep was a break from strategy, for tomorrow to burst forth with new advertising, new graffiti, and the toga, the billboard, that never stopped glowing. Part 5. The value of a hug. From rusty copper to silver denarium. As the afternoon gloom settled over the Roman streets, Marcia returned to her wordless role, a girl who sells intimate moments. In her world, value was not measured in gold bars or land, but in rusted coins or polished silver diners' heart, unsympathetic money. Every hug, every flirtatious glance, Every moment of reserve had a number. And that number, for Marcia, was both a recognition and a reminder that her identity was always being priced. One bidding screen, measuring every beat from the moment a guest walks through the door. Marcia assesses gait, dressed, eyes, breathing. With a slight nod, she suggests $2 for the first 5 minutes, $3 for 10 minutes, and $5 for a quarter of an hour. Each coin came with a promise, a hug, a smile, a brief confession. But because of the low price, Marcia had to fight with numbers. She couldn't let the service last too long, lest she lose money. Coins, the smallest gold coin in the vast empire, were worth little, but for a girl living in a dungeon who would refuse, it was the most precious moment, when money was exchanged for a noble, yet fragile feeling. She told herself, the value is not only in the money, but in the grateful smile. When the guest agreed, she put her hand on his shoulder and nodded to invite him into the room. Here, every second was a strictly measured step. Each second was a strictly measured step, Marcia told herself. Every minute must be worth its weight in gold. The tears that fell from the corners of her lips as the sad song played were Uenta's real tears. But what about Marcia? She realized that sometimes the most precious gift is not silver diners, but the moment of being listened to, of being understood, even if it is just a whim, but a marketing ploy, to make the customer believe that she had exchanged a piece of her soul. When she saw the customer still lingering, she whispered, these were the meretresses. Prostitutes considered the highest class in the profession. They sold not only their bodies but also their talents in conversation, music, and poetry. She moved deftly, quickly, but still slowly enough so that intimacy did not become awkward. It was a barter transaction, exchanging hunger for a little warmth. Marcia thought to herself, you may not have money, but you can have a heart. And in that moment, the value of human dignity was raised to the level of silver denarii enough to warm the long evenings. 2. She took out an exquisite cloth, spread it on a bed of straw, and sat across from her guest like a soloist. In the warm candlelight, she told stories about the olive groves of Gaul, sang a few old love songs that gave Marcia double the price of the service, which she kept until the end of the appointment. For Marcia, honor, even if it was traded, was still valuable. In a world valued in copper and silver, she made an unwritten rule: drink up the cup, but pay back enough so that I can remember you. Marcia carefully put the money in a small leather bag, thinking that if the client left, she could earn a lot of money to live on. Each scar was an invisible expense, impossible to convert into money. At night, she took off her shirt and looked at herself in the broken mirror. Marcia took it, smiling slightly, then gently touched her guest's shoulder, giving him a warm embrace. Both body and soul touched with layers of emotion. They wrote their names on the wall with a promise. Metal coat, high-level so she wrote it down in her life book. Invisible damage, priceless price. When the customer did not return, the debt of love hung in the balance. She found a dark corner, wiped her tears, and told herself, losing love is more expensive than losing money, because at least money can be calculated, but love is left unfinished. Not everyone paid in rusty copper. There were wealthy, well-dressed customers who pulled out shiny silver denarii. When she offered the combo denarii, 5 silver coins for 30 minutes, Marcia had to prepare carefully. She lifted the dusty curtains, cleared the table, lit a more fragrant oil lamp. The customer's heart fluttered, and Marcia felt it too. 3. Promotion. Sell more tears. Marcia knew the rule of upselling. By 5 minutes, by $5 Azeli, spend 3 more. If you pay 2 more coins, I will sing you a Venus poem. The customer usually nodded, handed over the money, and Marcia sang again. And so, intangible values, emotions, imaginations, desires are reduced to numbers. 4. Paying with food. Barter and dignity. Customers didn't always pay in cash. Some foolish people would hand her a stale loaf of bread, a dried onion, or a jar of fried beans. I will keep this gift as a love letter. In exchange for the cake, she gave the customer a warm hug. 5. Love debt. When a promise becomes a debt, some customers ask to pay later to make up for it next time. Octavia and I will come back to get the kiss back. Marcia remembered, but she also knew the promise on the wall was as easily faded as graffiti. 6. Deposit leverage. Transaction guarantee. Some clients were less than trusting and asked for a deposit, but she kept her word. When she was done, she handed over the excess deposit with a smile. 7. Invisible costs. Physical and mental damage along with the paid hugs. Marcia suffered. Sore knees, numb shoulders, bruises. What is the price of this pain? She did not know how many diners she would have to pay to erase the sadness. 8. Final price. Existence in the end. The greatest value is not in money, but in the right to live. Marcia put a hand on her heart, silently thanking every copper coin, every silver denarii, every stale loaf of bread, every debt helped her pay the rent, buy a bowl of lung porridge, and pay the Vectigal tax. I sell a moment to buy back life, she whispered. The price of the embrace was not just a transaction. but a bond that connected her life to a Roman society that, however harsh, however contemptuous, still needed her. It was a limestone maze, each floor and room reeking of kerosene and human odor, where time was compressed by the sound of labored breathing and sweat seeping through the fabric. As night fell, Marcia packed her toga, tucked her heart, took out money into her leather pouch, and bowed to the Venus Immolata, reminder that no matter what her worth, she was still a woman worthy of hope, love, and another life. Part 6. The Brotherhood. A small kingdom of sweat and heavy breathing, but in that stable, she still dreamed of tomorrow, a day when she could open the window, breathe in the light, and forget all the moments of being captured. A winding stone staircase led down to the cell of the Lupana, where Marcia and the other women lived between two worlds, the flickering light of kerosene lamps above and the dense darkness below. But when the wooden door creaked, a narrow corridor was revealed. Damp walls, low ceilings, and rats scurrying for scraps. Each room was about 2 meters wide, with only a stone bed with a thin straw mattress and a small oil lamp. There were no windows, no cracks for natural light. Everything was underground, as if the entire Roman city mocked her fate. 1. 2-star hotel architecture. Marcia treats Graffiti as a public review magazine, where she and her colleagues promote themselves without intermediaries. Sometimes she pays the errand boy to carve her name again, just to keep her position. From the outside, the Lupana was just a grayish-brown wall, a closed gate, and no sign. This is not a hotel, Marcia thought as she stepped through the door of her new room, but a stable for the soul. For them, prostitutes are property, and every penny a client pays is profit. When Leno came to check, Marcia bowed politely. Leno can be a woman, or even a retired meretrix, leading her younger brothers with hard experience. Then she turned and left 2.5 Marcia's life. It was an unwritten rule. The prostitute's sweat and smiles were exchanged for loose change, while the pimp kept the purse full. 2 walls tell stories. The walls of the room were covered with graffiti, old words, scrawled with pebbles or fingernails. Valeria here, best for 2 denarii. Lucilla, quick, quiet, cheap. Marcus was here twice. Good conversation. Each trace tells a story, a clumsy comment that is more sincere than any advertisement. In a world without honor, she whispered, shitting graffiti on walls is the only way to survive. 3. Brothel owner. Leno, the mighty Lenu, is the brothel owner, who collects the rent, calls in clients, and distributes commissions. Marcia respected Leno when she didn't overcharge, and despised her when she took too big a profit, sometimes as much as 50% of every dollar paid. They told stories about their families, their teenage years, or simply compared who had just received the tastier tofu. Their laughter was stiff, like the laughter of opera actors when the director gave the cue. But behind it was a quiet camaraderie, a small bond that kept them from feeling alone. I'm reporting. Today I served 6 customers and earned $8. Leno chuckled and marked the book. Give me 3.5. The rest is yours. For dark life, sometimes drunk customers would get violent. Sometimes competitors, other girls, would steal customers for cheaper prices. If a guest gets too far, shout to the nearby guards. But the guards only passed by occasionally. They had no interest in the fate of a man hiding at the bottom of society. Marcia had to be on her guard. She kept a small knife under her pillow, knew where the emergency exits were, and tried to look up at the sun, a thin light that filtered through the narrow crack in the tunnelless entrance. It was there that she felt a sense of life and hope. Even though she was trapped underground, the sky was still there, giving her the hope of one day being free, standing in the sunlight without having to sell her body, and the morning light that awaited her at the end of the tunnel. Leno never got too involved. If a customer got violent, she was on her own, and wrapped a folded scarf around her head, transforming Marcia into Lucilia for the time being. She climbed the stairs and walked through the cold hallway, leaving behind a kingdom of sweat and gasps. Each step echoed on the stone a promise. Tomorrow I will return, with new graffiti, with a new smile, and with hope that has not faded. Life in Lupana operates on a mechanical schedule. 5 o'clock, Leno knocks on each room door, wakes up to clean up, change sheets, check makeup. 6 o'clock, the main door opens, the smell of fish oil mixed with kitchen smoke. The first guest waddles in. 12 o'clock, quick lunchtime. In the hallway, a dry loaf, some beans, and some sour spring water. 15 o'clock, lunch break. Girls gather to take a short breather in a dark corner, listening to the noise of street football coming from upstairs. 18 o'clock, the dark hour begins. Oil lamps burn brightly. Crowds of customers pass by. Transactions are lightning fast. 22 o'clock, Leno closes the door, counts the money, knocks on each room door to check which girl hasn't paid the service fee. 23 o'clock, Lupina falls silent, except for breathing, dripping water, and the scratching of mice. Marcia memorized each hour like a note on the wall of her mind, even though she was tired. She couldn't fall asleep after 10 p.m. or she would lose her fine. 5. Forced laughter amid the smell of sweat and leftover wine. Marcia and her friends chatted quietly as they waited for customers. We are colleagues, Marcia said to Livia, her roommate, and we have to share smiles even if we know they are fake. 6. Risk and protection. Lupina was not a safe place. Leno's advice: don't let anyone cross the line. 7. Memories of light. Whenever she had a moment to spare, Marcia would lean against the wall. Light is the medicine, she thought, and hope is the invisible diamond. 8. Leaving the dungeon at the end of the day. As Leno closed the books, Marcia gathered her things, washed her coal-stained toga, and as the cellar door closed behind her, Marcia took a deep breath, thinking about the simple meal, the late sleep. Part 7. The bar. When serving and selling yourself mixed into a glass of sour grapes when night fell, Marcia left the dark Lupina, her feet still imprinted with moss, and entered the chaotic space of the tavern near the Temple of Venus. There, excess, alcohol, laughter, the smell of fermented fish, and body odors mixed with intimacy and rudeness. The tavern called Ponium was a reverse drama, where she served and continued to act out the story of having to exchange body and soul for those seeking oblivion. 1. Mixed scenery. Stepping through the gate of the shop, Marcia was immediately met with the heat radiating from the redwood fire, the sound of the pots sizzling with bean soup, and the strong smell of gas. The rickety wooden tables were placed close together. The stools were low, their feet stuck in the puddles of dishwater, and there were olive skins and bean husks scattered about. Everyone gathers here to seek the yeast of wine, the yeast of meat, or the yeast of words, to close their eyes and forget the sorrows of life. She carried cups of diluted liquor in her hands, listening to the customers' shrill calls, her eyes scanning the bar for opportunities. She smiled warmly and said, the atmosphere was like a thick net, tightly woven, trapping every breath. Amidst the flickering candlelight, customers come from all walks of life. From gray-haired old merchants, to drunkards, to soldiers just back from battle. Marcia put the cup down on the table and sat down quietly beside him, carrying with her the smell of perfume and red powder. Two roles intertwined. Marcia was not only a saleswoman, but also a bartender. She took them, put them in her waist pouch, and placed her hand on his leg, saying softly, "Thank you for believing in me." It was at that moment that Marcia truly felt a tentative connection, an ally in the night, someone who made her feel understood. The joke made the guests laugh and blush a little. 3. All the sounds created a lively, sometimes chaotic, background music, but the kind she loved. The rhythm of Roman life at its most real, earthy, but to draw customers into her world. Tonight, I am a goddess of the night, not a prostitute. Thanks to that, customers pay extra, like a VIP ticket, to enjoy the service of stargazing in the crowded city. Customers, buyers, and temporary allies. The customers followed silently, and she folded her barmaid uniform, returning to her role as Marcia the courtesan. Marcia sold not only her body, but also her eager ears, selling a support for her tired heart. Kentigorn, a former mercenary, slightly drunk, called out, "Marcia, give me an hour to talk, and another hour." When a customer ordered another drink, she bent down, quickly wiped the glass, then glanced into the dark corner, where the candlelight flickered behind the thin curtains. She spoke. She curled her lips slightly, made room for him, then tilted her head to listen. Gunshots, the sound of a guitar, stories about distant villages, about her dead wife. Marcia kept a small piece of cloth, scented with roses, to wipe her face when she felt suffocated. It was a talisman. At least she retained at least a hint of her feminine scent. As the conversation thickened, Kentigorn held out 3 silver coins. 4. Sometimes drunken customers would stagger and grab her clothes. Sometimes a group of drunks would fight and she would be caught in the middle of a crowd. For a moment, Marcia was allowed to breathe, allowed to remember her past life, allowed to hope for tomorrow. The bruise was still there, but she had to continue mixing drinks, not letting anyone know. Her feet were marked with lime and rat knife marks. She sighed softly, placed the scented cloth on her chest, and closed her eyes. The tavern still radiated heat on her skin. The candles were out. Drunken customers lay scattered about. Waiters cleared away the tables and chairs. The sound of alcohol flowing into a woman's body still echoed in her memories. The sounds of the restaurant still echoed with the waiters' laughter. The sound of wine being drained, and the sound of candle ash falling to the ground. Because the night was long, and the money was still waiting at the bar, Marcia had to stick to the wall, keep her distance, or grab a small knife from her heel to defend herself. Sound and rhythm, the clinking of glasses, the whispering, the clanging of a jar of garum being opened, and the sound of a peeper drifting down from the barbershop next door. Marcia dances softly to the music, not to entertain. 5. 2 timing trick. The tavern allowed her to do 2 jobs at once, serving and selling herself. This cup is for the beginning, and the other corner is for the end. Then she stepped lightly into the corner, carrying the cup and the toga, leaving behind her thin dress and her flirtatious gaze. 6. Risk and laughter. The tavern was no safer than the loop. Once she was punched in the shoulder while holding a glass of wine, and could you indulge it in time? 7. The smell of yeast and the smell of desire. Life in the tavern was a battle of smells. Too much pear cider, rotten food, sweat, skin, and powder. This scent, she whispered as she sniffed the cloth, Reminds me that I was once Luci Leah. 8. Rare break. As the customers gradually left, Marcia found a dark corner, sat with her back against the wall, and took off her leather shoes. It was a rare moment when she was allowed to be a normal person, not a waitress, not a prostitute. 9. Leaving the pub when the lights went down. She put on her toga, put her waitress coat in her bag, fixed her makeup, and stepped out into the doorway. Marcia thought to herself, "Tonight, I serve wine, and I serve life." And though the outer shell fades, the burning feeling remains forever. She walked through the night mist, leaving behind her a chaotic space, carrying with it the smell of yeast and desire. Roman life was sleepless. And so is Marcia. Part 8. Freedom and danger feed on the streets of Rome. Leaving the noisy tavern, Marcia did not return to the dark cellar or the cozy loop, but to the dusty, clog-clacking streets. This was the domain of the prostitutes, unfettered by their masters, but who traded their freedom for risk. Each step on the slippery cobblestones was a song of survival, amid the light of oil lamps and the hearts of people. 1. The afternoon sun flickered through a small silk umbrella, casting shadows on the pavements covered in sewage and breadcrumbs. Marcia chose a corner near the Temple of Diana, place where there were fewer guards, but still soldiers resting, merchants strolling, and beggars milling about. Street outdoor stage. The Roman streets were not for the faint of heart. She wore a light burnt orange toga, the hem pulled back loosely, revealing her provocative bare shoulders. Her jet black wig fluttered in the wind, her pale skin contrasting with the bronze glow of the mist. Amidst the smoke and dust, she appeared out of nowhere, both familiar and mysterious. 2. She knew that all she needed was the right look and the right gesture. The merchant paused, clasped his hands together, and walked slowly over. Marcia smiled. "Good afternoon. Would you like a moment of privacy?" Marcia turned, suddenly pulled out a knife, approached and whispered, "I don't play games. Go, or it will be too late." The man backed away in horror and sped away. As difficult as it was, Marcia understood. Freedom must be paid for with 24/7 vigilance. When a merchant strolled by, she tilted her head, glanced sideways, as if to ask, "Are you tired?" The invitation was not spoken, but a subtle one, forcing the passerby to stop for a moment. Eyes and gestures, she had to be alert to the echo of clogs, to the firelight shining through the bushes, to the murmur from the street corner. Marcia did not need to shout as loudly as in the loop. She stretched her legs, propped them up on the stone platform, and ran her hands across the hem of her toga. The customer understood, approached, and leaned down to kiss her neck lightly, a sign to pay a deposit before entering the private alley. In her world, silence is sometimes the loudest sound. 3. There are no pimps to protect her, no clear service fee rules. Marcia has to negotiate, keep herself safe. Marcia watches them closely. Age, build, severity. She only sees customers when their eyes are elsewhere. That night she returned to the Lupina with her clothes but her heart on fire. Freedom is always a danger that runs deep in the blood. Sometimes the customers change their minds, sometimes the guards appear. She just has time to pull a small knife from her shoe heel. Hidden risks. Freedom on the street has its price. The night before, she had been followed by a drunk as she left the bar. 4. Movement strategy in a world without rules. Camaraderie is a lifesaver. In dark corners they exchanged information. Tomorrow night the market of the Temple of Venus will be busier. Tomorrow we'll move to the wood market. They shared stale bread, fragrant cloth, secrets to keep alive. Marcia did not stay in one place for long. She followed a travel schedule. Marcia set her own prices, but suffered the consequences. Customers left in panic or happily withdrew more money. Evening near Diana Temple, where visitors can walk. Late evening, around the public bathhouse, where soldiers and merchants stopped. Midnight, in front of the kindergartens and theaters, where the audience goes home. She knew she had won at least a few more coins to buy bread, a bowl of porridge, a breath of life. All around was the sound of mice and heavy breathing. At that moment, many emotions mixed together. Fear, longing, adventure, and loneliness. Each location was a new opportunity, but also a blurred boundary between light and darkness. 5. She quietly took off her toga, buried her face in the straw blanket, and closed her eyes. The long night of freedom had passed, but in her heart the flame of pride still burned. Freedom had a price, but freedom was also an ego that could not be bought with any amount of money. Shortcut communication. Nonverbal code. Sometimes no words are needed, just a sign. Marcia gently lifted her skirt, ran her fingers through the brass hairpin, and turned toward the dark corner. This method avoids eavesdropping by guards, avoids crowd gossip, but still ensures the transaction. 6. Cerberus. The eyes of surveillance. The streets have Cerberus, guards and wardens. They don't specialize in catching prostitutes, but if they see a trouble, they will intervene. Once she was chased by the guards, Marcia jumped over the bushes, leaving her toga fluttering in the wind, and slid down the alley. 7. Connect with colleagues. Freelance meant solitude, but Marcia kept in touch with a few other no enemies, only allies, she told a friend through her eyes. 8. Free market price on the road. Marcia does not fix the price. Lower class, 1 copper coin for a short time. Merchant, 3 silver coins for full service. Special guest, deposit $5 in advance. Private appointment, prices fluctuated according to supply and demand. Rainy days, few customers, discounts. Holidays, many people, increases. 9. The final test. Near dawn, she led the guests into a corner of the alley and set up a makeshift curtain. As the guests departed, leaving behind a few cold coins, Marcia wiped the sweat from her brow, pulled her toga over her face, and stepped into the almost stormless night. 10. Retreat and revive before dawn. Marcia returned to a lupina, or makeshift dungeon. Although dangerous, she whispered, freedom is a kingdom without conditions. And for Marcia, each night wandering the streets with risky steps is an ode to the right to decide one's fate, if only for a moment. Part 9. Paying taxes, being registered and loss of human rights. Passing through the lupina gates or wandering the streets, Marcia always carried in her pocket a special passport, her certificate of registration as a prostitute, public evidence that she was providing sexual services to the Roman Empire. Every time she passed through the great temple gates of the tax collector's office, she would take it out and bow to the mandarin, a humiliating but obligatory ritual. 1. Vectigal ex Capturis. Tax status. Each had to register her name, her place of residence, and pay a fixed amount, the equivalent of 2 silver coins a month. The tax collector, in a wide-brimmed hat, hesitantly wrote the information down on a wax list, then handed out a tiny certificate like a ticket to a dark market. In Rome, prostitutes did not work illegally. They were allowed, but they had to pay a tax, a Vectigal ex Capturis, or a sexual activity tax. This is more than a tax, she whispered. This is a license to trample on human dignity. Marcia always kept it in a leather pouch, tucked under her toga, to prevent it from being stolen. And down the lupina corridor, begging the brothel owner to lend her the old piece of paper to copy it. It took her an hour to complete the makeshift permit. Then she hurriedly went to pay the additional tax. Every morning, before she went out, she took it out, folded it, and checked for tears or fading ink. But if she did not pay the coin, she would be fined. She might even be imprisoned, adding a stamp to her painful memories. She lowered her head, adjusted her toga, and said to herself, that invisible stamp is heavier than the tax. Marcia glanced at the circular stamp on the paper, a handcuff, a symbol of state power. 2. In the eyes of the law, her word was no match for that of a noble. Having been cheated out of her money, she had 2 options: walk away, or call Leno for help. Leno could help collect the refund, but that would come with a new service fee. Registration form. Carry it like a talisman. Her status as an infamous, a prostitute, a sex slave disqualified her from citizenship. Marcia hurried to see Leno, but Leno just laughed sarcastically. If you were cheated, then you have to accept it. Nowadays, cheating is also a form of entertainment, and Marcia lost 2 silver coins. The loss was not counted as tax, but an invisible tax on self-esteem. They not only took care of roads and food, but also regulated forms of entertainment, including prostitution. Whenever there were too many prostitutes or graffiti that was too offensive, they immediately ordered it to be cleared, fined, or banned. This question has no answer, because freedom and crime are only a piece of paper away. She had no right to marry, could not testify in court, and could not inherit property. The registration only proved that she was legal, while the infamous stamp was imprinted directly on her life, not on papers but deeply engraved in the hearts of others. She considered it a small ballad. She existed amid great power, amid laws and discrimination. The certificate, the tax stamp, the money all reminded her every month, an endless cycle. But her heart still burned with hope. One day, the paper asking to return to being Luci, an ordinary citizen, not paying taxes for her status as a prostitute. Marcia does not dare to take the risk because she has been labeled publicly, but she knows the game. I pay with blood, with tears, with memories, but I still live and still hope. Every tax, every stamp, every harsh law is a challenge for her to prove. Even without citizenship, even with her status as an ebullient, she is still worthy of respect, at least from herself. They rent hidden corners, use passwords, and trade only through rumors. The registration paper turns into a fake version on the skin, using homemade ink made from charcoal and oil. She hid behind the curtain, listening to the screams, the clatter of money. She took out the registration form, placed it on her knees, and whispered. The next morning, the alley was quiet. No one passed by. The tavern was quiet, and she had to borrow a cloth to mark the graffiti with her name. The certificate was printed on fragile animal skin, which was easily damaged. She had paid her tax for last night, and she was ready to pay it again tomorrow in sweat, in smiles, and in the haze of regulation. One day she discovered a wet ink stain on the paper, so she spent a whole day walking. Up 3. Contempt, the invisible seal with papers in hand. Roman society still did not let her go. As she walked down the street, Marcia felt mocking glances. Ladies in white scarves feigned bewilderment. Gentlemen reciting poetry paused, smiling contemptuously. Children threw stones and shouted for the law binds. Where justice is not for her, Marcia knew. If the customer didn't pay, she had no right to sue. Once, she was offered a price by a well-dressed man, who then used the excuse of falling into a visual trap to escape. 5. Management in disguise. Governing from above, under the imperial government. There was also an official in charge of public order, the Eid. Marcia had witnessed the night of the emergency. Dozens of Ediles with torches came to the brothel, dragged all the furniture out into the street, fined and banned. 6. The amulet. Illegal sign to avoid taxes and controls. Some girls do not register, they operate underground, doing business black. She wondered, the registration fee gives us a license to exist, but does the underground fee bring true freedom? 7. Memories and hopes every time she paid her taxes. Marcia straightened her back and looked at the official who was taking the notes. 8. Whispers under the porch of the brothel at midnight. Marcia sat on the Lupina porch, looking up at the misty sky. I pay taxes to the Empire, but I also pay taxes to fate. The words on the paper may fade, but the whisper is engraved in her heart. And as dawn broke, Marcia hastily tucked the registration paper into her bag, adjusted her dress, pulled on thin gloves, and stepped out into the hallway. Part 10. Fake love and real dreams. As the night slowly closed behind the flickering oil lamps, Marcia often returned to a dark cellar or some rugged corner of the street to listen to her heart. In a world where her body was priced at a penny, there were many times when customers offered her love in a hurry. They mistakenly thought that trading with their bodies could also buy their hearts. But money did not always bring true feelings. Here are some of the memories that Marcia holds in her heart. 1. He handed her 5 silver coins, not taking his eyes off her painted face. Broken love stories one evening, or a lace a wealthy elephant trader came to the brothel and met Marcia. He tenderly poured her a glass of fragrant Gallic wine, then whispered, "You remind me of my wife who passed away last year." In the yellow candlelight, Marcia listened to him tell of his passionate marriage, then of the pain of loss. "I will marry you, I promise." The promise was sweet as honey, but Marcia remained silent, placing his hand on the thin flap of her toga. "You forget one thing, sir. I only sell time, not the future." He left, leaving behind the loneliness and the 5 cold silver coins. They did not exchange diners, only tears and sympathetic smiles. At that moment, Marcia felt not just merchandised, but a person, at least for the night. But when dawn came, that love quickly faded into the morning light. As Lucretia returned to the palace, and Marcia returned to the dungeon, they believed in the promise of a peaceful home. Marcia witnessed many friends sleeping with tax collectors and waking up in the morning to find their registration papers missing. She had hopes, quit her job, and saved every penny. But Flavia couldn't pay the rent for the first day. Leno threw her out, and she disappeared for a week before returning, deeply disappointed. Losing their profession, they lost their certificates, and could not survive. Aurelius covered his mouth with his hand, his eyes red. 2. Septimius told them about his dream of opening a library, about the books he collected. Marcia listened attentively, but when the bill arrived 3 times the usual amount, she stopped. Love in the dark. Real moments. Not all stories end in pain. Once, she met Lucretia, a lady wearing a discreet stole, sneaking into the tavern. Lucretia said hesitantly. The two walked under the moonlight, passing through deserted streets. Lucretia confided in her about her inhibitions and social roles, about her desire to be understood and free. He would ask her out, take her around the lake, show her the painting, and then ask her to double his salary if he could keep her with him longer. But usually only the sound of wind and streetlights answered. I saw her on Graffiti. I wonder what that cloak hides. Each book, for her, was a ticket out of her infamy. Lucretia did not seek sex, but Marcia's face, not the Marcia on stage, but the one behind the makeup. Marcia clasped her hands before each charcoal-stained wall. Live your life to the fullest. Don't let your dreams become your obsessions. Marcia once found torn robes, scattered makeup, and traces of sadness, those little stars in the Roman night sky, extinguished forever. Marcia understood. Infatuation does not buy happiness, it only makes one feel foolish. Whether someone gives her 5 silver coins, a painting, or a treasure trove of the future, she still sticks to her rule. Do not sell hope, only lend moments. Marcia lent Lucretia her scented handkerchief, and they sat together by the sofa. She folded it and put it in her pocket, the only thing that would survive the long night. 3. The trap of illusion, whatever tomorrow brought. The dream of a small bookstore would always burn brightly in her heart, a flame of hope that would never be extinguished. In the midst of the chaos of Rome, many girls abandoned their professions to follow their husbands and give up the game. But she believed that if she held on to her dream, she would find her way to the bookstore. She would tell stories to children, and one day, Marcia, Luci, Leah, or whatever her name was, would be free to choose her own future. A friend of Flavia dreamed of opening a small perfume shop. Marcia learned the lesson. When you dream, you must have a plan to continue dreaming. For lovers, victims, and deceivers, there were real lovers. Like Septimius, a shy merchant who would come every week, carrying a small cell. Marcia agreed casually, out of curiosity. That evening, as they walked through the park, "Sir, I am not an object, but I still need to live." Septimius bowed his head, returned half the money, and quietly withdrew. 5. Echoes from the future. Marcia's wildest dream was a small bookstore, not a perfume shop, but one where she could sell used books, make tea, and sit and tell stories to customers. She silently sent a prayer through each signature on the graffiti. "Whoever wants an old book, give Marcia $1." 6. The stars are falling out. Many girls committed suicide after being betrayed. Others left, wandering without a trace. Whenever she looked at old graffiti, she saw names, and that's a brief summary of her life. 7. Promise. Among hundreds of empty promises, there is only one promise that Marcia keeps in mind: "I will not lose myself in every hug, every word of love." As dawn broke, Marcia wrote her name on a piece of cloth. Marcia believes in tomorrow. 8. Burning hope. Deep down she knew ancient Rome was not for a woman like her. Amidst the screeching of carriage wheels and the neighing of horses on the main road, her whisper echoed in the night: "I deserve true love, and a life not taxed with my body." And so, in the dark hallway, between the graffiti and the Venus charm, Marcia closed her eyes and smiled. Part 11. WHEN. Lipstick fades and heels become heavy. Destiny or freedom. Last night, Marcia climbed the damp stone steps, leaving the cellar and the bustling street behind. How many times had she thought of the depressing days when her youth was over, when her wig was grayer, when wrinkles appeared at the corners of her eyes. That was when makeup was no longer enough to hide the signs of time, and each step, instead of being light, was wobbly because of calloused heels. She wondered, was fate giving me this story, or was freedom accepting it? 1. Evening light. The mark of the years she saw two tired, yet determined eyes. As people age, they often lose their recklessness, but Marcia held on to her desire. Even as the mirror faded, her soul still burned. As others packed up their stores and headed home, Marcia was still struggling to make ends meet. Passing mossy stone pillars, the oil lamp was fading, the candlelight was broken, leaving only the steady ticking of the wall clock. Makeup can cover, but not erase, memories. Thousands of sleepless nights, thousands of breaths exchanged, thousands of tired smiles. She stopped in front of a cracked bronze mirror, the reflection now showing a woman with less than perfect makeup, with wrinkles on her cheeks and dry, cracked lips. "Time," she whispered, "is the truest painter." Marcia bent down and wiped the mirror with a rotting cloth, a rag that had once been used to mix lipstick. She decided to become Hélène, madam of a small lupanar on the outskirts of the city. In her twilight years, with nearly 2 decades of experience, she knew the rules, her relationships with Leno and the Ediles, and her list of loyal customers. To transform into a Madame Rule, a makeshift kingdom. When her wig was no longer thick enough and her makeup no longer bright enough, Marcia knew she could no longer play the role of a youthful courtesan. In her old age, no longer hot, she uses her experience and old amulets to advise. Madame Marcia's was no fancy hut. It was a second-floor room, the hallway still damp, but she was now the one to judge. Room rental price. She decided on a reasonable price to attract young girls to rent, and to divide the commission more fairly. Code of conduct. She issued friendly but strict rules. Customers must pay in full. Girls must maintain hygiene. Anyone who violates will be fired. Training program. She teaches makeup, style, and even the skill of reading customers. Marcia suddenly realized, the greatest strength is not in appearance, but in the heart and intelligence honed through trials. As Madame Marcia still wears the short toga sign of her profession but walks with more confidence. Her makeup lightly applied, her wig neatly arranged. She tells the girls, keep smiling, but don't let your fate imprison your soul. Each callus was a story of survival. When the storm knocked her down, she stood up. When the whip was harsh, she smiled. When the memories flooded back, she kept the faith. From the role of a prostitute, she transformed herself into a spiritual mother, leading young girls, her juniors who were once rivals, to overcome prejudice and find the safest way to survive. When she walked, the sound of her clogs hitting the stone rang out like a wake-up call. Each step was a price to pay for the pain. 3. Marcia's name now lies next to those of her juniors, with a date added. Madame, 45 years of career. Those lines are not just an assessment, but a legacy. Living evidence of people who lived, fought, and existed undaunted. Let our names be imprinted as an affirmation. We have lived, we have tried, we have freely chosen life. Professor of life, fortune teller, and psychologist, Marcia not only manages the business, she also becomes a spirit medium for those who seek her out. About health, how to keep warm, prevent diseases without spending money to buy a doctor. Psychologically, how to calm down when customers are rude, how to hide pain in a smile. Carrying the Madame's advice, keep your dignity even if it is just the dignity of a free person. She wondered, when she no longer sold her body, when her hair turned gray and her makeup faded, would life still have meaning? About orientation. If anyone wants to open a bar, she will show them a cheap place to rent. If anyone wants to quit their job, she will show them the way back to their old house. Under the flickering light, the girls gathered around the gentle madam. They cried, they laughed, they believed in the story of experience. 4. Heavy footsteps. Traces of sacrifice. Life was unforgiving. Marcia's feet were covered with calluses, thorns running down her heels, and bruises that never fully healed. And how to keep her name alive in the city's memory. She folded the letter and placed it beside the legal documents. Books, licenses, tax returns, and graffiti. The path ahead was still unclear whether the bookstore would open or if it was just a dream she didn't know. Outside, Rome was filled with sounds, the voices of tourists, the clatter of cartwheels, the bustle of footsteps. She walked slowly, each step marking the path of street. Then I will open a small bookstore in the middle of the street where anyone who needs to confide, I will listen. I hope that day, I will still be human, still Luci. The letter was Ollie, but she kept going, kept moving forward. In her old age, Marcia no longer feared resentment. She was calm like a warrior who had completed her mission, fighting for life in a harsh society. 5. Immortal soul. Legacy from graffiti. Behind the small lupana, the wall still holds old and new graffiti. Marcia often took the girls to see the wall, saying, each of us, even if our makeup fades, still leaves a mark. Girls look at graffiti and see hope. Even if their makeup fades, their names will live on forever in stone, as undeniable proof that they once existed, once stood up. 6. Autonomy. A life lesson. In her 50s, Marcia understood that the value of freedom could not be exchanged for money. The answer comes from the eyes of the young girls. When they stretched confidently, walked down the street with their legal registration papers, Marcia realized, freedom is not about not being bound, but about being autonomous in every choice. Even the worst is still your own choice. 7. The final concerto. Peace and serenity. One twilight afternoon, Marcia sat by the cellar window, rereading the last letter from Lucilia, the girl who dreamed of becoming a fortune teller and opening a bookstore. If one day I no longer have the strength to sell my body, I will sell my knowledge. Marcia smiled, tears rolling down her wrinkled cheeks. But she was no longer afraid. A lifetime of struggle had taught her the social machine, the value of freedom, ate sweet and bitter ending. Marcia stood up, donned her shorts, took off the last sign of her profession, and walked out of the cellar. In her heart echoed the slogan that a friend once said, live like a great storyteller, even if the story is sad. Marcia smiled gently and said to herself, my life is an epic poem that, although not carved in marble, still echoes through graffiti, through memories, and through every step taken to choose freedom. And with a solemn step, Marcia Lucilia once again walked proudly into the night, carrying with her sadness, aspiration, and the strength of immortal dignity. Part 12. Conclusion. When history pretends to forget those who know, amidst the hundreds of miles of Rome, the bustling streets, the majestic temples, the marble statues, there are nameless shadows, footprints imprinted on the stone floor, heavy breathing in the lupiner, graffiti etched on the walls of every intersection. These are the traces of Marcia Luci and countless other nameless women who have collected every coin, every breath, for this city to exist in glory. And they deserve an explanation. They are not just infamous in the law, but the silent soul of Rome. They found receipts for sex, wooden plaques with the price, the girl's name, the date and time of the transaction. But in history books, these female figures appear only as shadows, then disappear. One, it was a more vivid declaration than any court inscription. They could not carve her name in stone. But the scribble in the bare mortar had survived the century. Echoes of graffiti, witnesses of history. When archaeologists excavated Roman private residences, they found endless graffiti on the walls. Scrawled lines recounting moments of infatuation, moments of passion, moments of flight. Marcia had once carved her name in a piece of gravel. Marcia, 42 years, sold to hope. 2. From prostitute to madam, from Lucilia to Marcia, she has transformed herself through each role, and the right to self-determination at every step of their lives. We still choose our own path. The remaining prayer. Dignity creates value. History often praises military officers, emperors, philosophers, but forgets those who fed the empire with flesh and desire. Marcia Lucilia and her colleagues sold their breath, their smiles, and their hopes, so that every Vectigal tax contributed to the construction of a memorial, and feeling that Rome was not only proud but also filled with the scent of oil, the smell of sour wine, and the smell of the desire for freedom. On it is written the historian's inscription. Here stood the brothel Lupino. Few people noticed that the broken stones were once graffiti, once imprinted with the name of the girl with faded breasts. Every night in a tavern nourished the courage of soldiers. Every graffiti was a reminder. This civilization was built not only with swords, but with the blood and tears of anonymous women. Their prayer is dignity. Despite their status as infamous, they still retain the right to dream, the right to hope. When judging, listen to the whispers from underground, to the dirty graffiti on the walls. to the erased stories. Look into the eyes of others, not just with money, but with compassion. Because history should not only record reputations, but also carve out the names of the destinies that contributed to the building of civilization. When history turns the page, don't forget to look back. Beneath the walls engraved with Caesar's name, there are also scribbles, small and inconsequential, but no less powerful. 3. The journey from ordinary life to immortality. Marcia, Luci, Leah, and countless other nameless women continue to live in memories, in graffiti, in every step on the old street. Every time you walk through the old alley, close your eyes, hear the soft breathing. It is the echo of those who have fed the empire with their sweat, tears, and thirst for freedom. From the damp cellar corners, through the luminous steps, through the taverns and the old streets, Marcia carries with her every step challenges and dreams. The journey has no clear destination, not silver diners, not the recognition of the upper class, but the echo of human dignity. Even if life forces us, but in calloused footprints, scattered graffiti, and the burning desire to live free in the hearts of anonymous girls, Marcia, Luci, Leah, or whatever name she goes by beneath the rouge, tells a story of faith, of temporary smiles, and of unyielding pride. Hello Luci, Leah, hello women who made history by existing. 4. The beauty of time, a legacy for the next generation today. As we walk through the Forum Square, we may see a stone column made from many broken pieces. These scripts are an invitation for us to listen to the quiet voice beneath the halo. No matter how small or anonymous it deserves to be named, respected, and loved. Each of us walks on the path of the 1,000-year-old stone, leaving footprints, worn or bright. Their legacy is not in official history books, but is hidden in alleys, in thousands of scratches on walls, in stories passed down from generation to generation like amulets that help us not forget the breath of the past, who have made history not just a dry milestone, but an epic about human pride, sacrifice, and aspiration for freedom. Imagine one day visitors stopping to look at the old graffiti, reading the names, Marcia and Luci, listening to the vivid story. 5. Message for today: the current generation can easily judge the injustices of the past, but remember, every society has its own darkness. Marcia teaches us, respect human dignity, no matter what the circumstances. 6. Indelible footprints. Closing and opening. Now, as we watch the finale of this series, let the image of Marcia, the girl who stood in line to sign taxes, wrote graffiti, and applied makeup in the dark, remain as a reminder. Those footprints are not just steps. They are declarations of freedom, of the desire to be fully human. 7. Ending, not ending. The script ends, but the story does not. And when the candle flickers out in the corner of the cellar, leave a message with pen or heart. Hello Marcia. Because history is only complete when we leave no one behind. Amid the dim lights of the lupanar, the smell of fish oil, and the traces of rouge, we see another Rome not in marble monuments. They sold their bodies but not their souls, paid their taxes but did not lose their dignity, wrote their names on the wall of time to prove that in the great machine of history, every drop of sweat, every broken breath, also contributed to feeding the empire. When closing the story, leave in your heart the image of those ordinary women, because it is they, with their never-ending heartbeats and dreams,